Welcome to our beginner's guide to composting. Compost enriches our soils, feeds our veggies, and makes quick work of the organic waste we produce. Let's get digging into what composting can do for your garden and take a look at some of the different compost methods that can be used. So, why would you compost? Composting can seem daunting from the onset, but it's well worth the effort. An inch of compost on top of a garden bed can carry your plants through a season of vigorous growth. When you add compost to the base of fruit trees, it aids in the production of flavorful, nutrient-packed fruit. If you have soil trouble, compost transforms sandy dirt into water-retaining, nutrient-rich soil. Similarly, it can lighten waterlogged clay soils into something significantly more workable. Managing your own waste is an earth-friendly initiative. You can turn your waste into nutrient-rich compost and grow your own beautiful vegetables and fruit. If that hasn't convinced you yet, high-quality compost isn't cheap. If you have a large garden, the expense can really add up. Making your own compost is an affordable, often free solution. So, composting is pretty awesome. The next thing we need to look into is the types of material that make compost. When discussing composting, you'll hear talk of green and brown materials. Brown materials tend to be dry, brown, and rich in carbon. Examples include wood chips, leaves, straw/hay, paper products like newspaper, paper plates, napkins, coffee filters, and tea bags, cardboard, and dirt. A pile with too much brown material is slow to break down and will not reach a high enough temperature to kill weed seeds and harmful bacteria. Green materials tend to be moist, green, and rich in nitrogen. Examples include grass, fruit and vegetable scraps, coffee grounds and tea bags, weeds, plant trimmings, eggshells, manure, horse, goat, rabbit, sheep, chicken, etc. And seaweed. A pile that has too much green material will break down quickly and be very hot. There have actually been rare instances of compost piles combusting. When temperatures are too high, some nitrogen is lost and beneficial bacteria start to die off. Variety is key in your compost pile. The more diverse the materials, the wider range of nutrients you'll find in your finished compost. Let's look at 6 common composting methods and explore their merits and drawbacks. Method 1. Hot composting. One of the most popular methods, hot composting, involves alternating 5-inch layers of green and brown material in a large pile that measures at least 1 cubic meter. At this size, the center of the heap can generate enough heat to break down material quickly. It gets hot enough to destroy any weed seeds, as well as traces of heat-sensitive bacteria like salmonella that may be present in animal manure. You should aim for your pile to reach 140 degrees Fahrenheit, 60 degrees Celsius. Proper moisture is important in your compost pile. Moisture allows the bacterial, fungal, and worm populations that decompose organic material to thrive. If you squeeze a handful of material, 1 drop should come out. Climate also plays a role in compost pile moisture. In climates with heavy rainfall, compost bins need to be sheltered. In drier climates, watering your compost heap may be a weekly chore. A typical hot compost system involves turning your pile twice. The goal is to push the more decomposed material from the center of the pile to the outer edge. The coarse material from the outside of the stack should be moved to the center where it will break down faster. You know you are ready to turn your compost heap when it reaches 140 degrees Fahrenheit. When the temperature level peaks at 140 degrees Fahrenheit again and then begins to fall, you are ready for your second flip. After the second flip, the material cures for a few more weeks before it is complete. The entire process can take as little as 3 months. Method 2, the 18-day permaculture method. The 18-day permaculture method is one of the fastest composting methods. Like hot composting, the finished compost will be free from weeds, seeds, and temperature-sensitive harmful bacteria. When building your compost pile, you will need 1/3 finely shredded brown materials, 1/3 manure. If you're using old manure, break it up first. 1/3 fresh green material. The pile must be at least 1 cubic meter and should be piled in such a way that it stands 5 feet high and looks like a volcano. You can place an activator at the center of the pile to launch microbial activity. Activators include comfrey, nettles, yarrow, finished compost, urine, fish, or animal carcasses. At this point, the pile should be covered. After 4 days, the pile will begin to warm and you will turn the pile for the first time. From here, the heap needs to be turned every second day until you reach day 18. Days 6 and 8 will be the warmest. In a perfect world, you would measure around 140 degrees Fahrenheit. After each turning of the pile, be sure to cover the heap back up again. By day 18, the temperature of the pile should have dropped and the material should be fully broken down. If the pile has not fully broken down by day 18, add 2 more days. The more finely chopped materials are, the quicker they break down. The increased surface area allows bacteria to better access it. Because this method has such a short turnaround, chopping materials up into small pieces is recommended. Like hot composting, you want to be sure that you are keeping the pile adequately moist. If the outside of the pile is cooler than the middle, add more water. If the outside of the heap is hot and the center is cooler, the pile is too wet. Method 3, cold composting. Cold composting is by far the slowest composting method. It can take a year or longer to see finished material. Yet, cold composting calls to my lazier gardener that says, hey, Mother Nature will gladly do all that work for you. And that's the philosophy at the heart of cold composting. Keep everything up and leave it. You'll still want to have a good mix of green and brown ingredients, but with a cold compost pile, you aren't doing any of the turning and temperature monitoring. You're just allowing Mother Nature to do her work according to her own schedule. Because this method does not reach that critical temperature of 140 degrees Fahrenheit, you shouldn't add aggressive weeds, plants that have gone to seed, meat, dairy, or dog and cat waste. This method will not destroy viable seeds and harmful bacteria. Nonetheless, it is quite lovely to have something in the garden that takes care of itself. Method 4, compost tumblers. If you don't like the idea of turning a compost pile, but you want to enjoy the benefits of hot composting, consider a compost tumbler. These machines come in a variety of sizes and styles, but the gist of it is that you can crank, roll, or turn your compost without using a shovel or pitchfork. To create compost in one of these machines, you fill it with an equal mix of green and brown, even small amounts of meat, and then spin it daily. It can take as little as 3 weeks to get compost using this method. One of the biggest benefits of this method is that it is extremely difficult for pests to access your compost. If you're fighting a rodent infestation, compost tumblers are a great way of removing a food source, yet you continue to get a good harvest of compost. One drawback to this method is the lack of worms and the many beneficial microbes associated with worms. Tumblers also have a much smaller working space and you'll only get limited amounts of compost. Method 5, worm composting. Vermicomposting harnesses a red wiggler's innate ability to rapidly break down food scraps into a highly desirable form of compost called worm castings. Brown materials, such as leaves and newspaper, provide bedding for the worms, while weekly additions of fruit and vegetable scraps feed the worms. Worms will happily devour most vegetable and fruit scraps, but meat and dairy products should be avoided. After each feeding, add a bit of bedding on top to minimize unpleasant odors. We have lots of articles on our blog about worms, including which worms are best for your vegetable garden and step-by-step worm farming. Check them out. We'd love to see you there. Method 6. Burying food scraps. When a tomato grows, it pulls its own unique cocktail of minerals from the soil and into its leaves. Yet, a bean plant will pull an entirely different combination from the soil. In fact, beans actually add nitrogen back into the soil. Given that each plant depletes soil differently, why do we amend each bed with exactly the same compost? Native American farming practices address this question. At the end of the season, instead of removing the dying tomato vine and tossing it onto a compost pile where it stews with a medley of other materials, they bury the plant in the same location where it grew. This way, the same minerals that were pulled from the soil are returned to exactly the same space that they came from. It's as close to a closed-loop system as possible. In the fall, when the plants have died back, an 8-inch trench is dug in the center of the bed and the bodies of the plants are buried. The closer the material is left to the surface, the longer it will take to break down. If buried deeply, everything should be decomposed in time for the following spring. Okay, you're well on your way to awesome compost. How can you tell when it's finished and ready to add to your garden? Try these 3 simple steps. If you're using a hot composting method, the pile shouldn't be warm anymore. You should not be able to recognize your initial ingredients. The exception here is sticks. It takes a long time to break down. Fortunately, fungus actually likes some twiggy bits. And finally, take a sniff. Your compost should smell like earth, not like rotting vegetables or manure. Composting can be quite a science, but don't be too hard on yourself. At the end of the day, Mother Nature will make sure that your compost breaks down. Effective composting just expedites the process. Do you have a compost pile? And what is your favorite method of composting? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.